All right, everyone, welcome to the second webinar in our 2019 Markel Safety First webinar series featuring Dr. Chris Thurber. My name is Beth Judson, and I will be hosting today's webinar. So before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Your computer microphones and your telephones will be muted during the presentation. So if you have any questions, please use the chat feature. And just something to know about the chat feature, please make sure you select all panelists when you're sending your comments and your questions to us. This way Dr. Thurber or myself will be able to answer your questions as they come in. And I believe that's all I have. So without further ado, Dr. Chris Thurber.
All right. Thanks very much, Beth. Very excited to be back participating in the Markel webinar series. It's a wonderful educational series that I'm honored to be part of, and makes me feel really good that Markel is a leader in this industry and pushing forward educational materials that will prevent accidents and injuries and illnesses, and really happy that so many people are joining us today. Some of you may be watching this in a recording, and you'll benefit from it as well. The only thing you won't be able to do is submit questions live, but I'll certainly ask Beth to interrupt if I've missed a question, and if you see me looking to the side, it's because I'm looking to see whether there's anything in the chat room that people want to know about. The topic for today is waterfront safety design, and so I'm going to be talking about elements of policies, procedures, and the physical plant that contribute to safety, that contribute to a reduction in accidents and injuries on the waterfront. This is different from a webinar on lifeguard training or skills verification or swim checks, things like that. Really talking about design elements, design of policy, design of the physical plant, as I said, of your waterfront, whether you're on a natural body of water like a lake or river or the ocean, or your summer youth program has a pool, or maybe more than one pool, or maybe a combination of a pool and a natural body of water. This material is going to be very helpful to you. I'm going to show you slides from different sources, mostly, though, drawn from the camp where I've spent the last 38 summers, the YMCA Camp Belknap in central New Hampshire. I was a camper there and worked there each summer for 33 summers, and for the last few summers have taken a step back in more of a consultative role. But that nearly 4 decades of being at Belknap also included almost 30 years as the waterfront director. So that's the background with which I'm approaching this content for you today, and you can see my contact information there. Pretty much, if you look for Chris Thurber, although I do have, there are a few other people in the world with that name, you should be able to find me, and always happy to be in contact with people, answer follow-up questions. So, camps have been around for 160 years, organized summer camps in the United States, and this is really a worldwide movement, a way to accelerate positive youth development. And in the research that I've had an opportunity to take part in, it's pretty clear that one of the wonderful things about a camp setting is it is a beautiful complement to a traditional classroom setting. I just got back from a trip to China working with an organization called Ideas that has created some North American style overnight camps and day camps, and the contrast there is even more stark. But if you think about why camps are so wonderful, kind of what is the secret sauce, we're taking them from mostly inside at school to mostly outside, from mostly sitting to mostly running around, from mostly being told what to do to mostly figuring things out for themselves. And one of the places where people have always loved spending time outside and running around and figuring things out for themselves and forming a community is on the waterfront. So I've got some older pictures here from camps, and we're going to have to ignore the fact that you can easily spot people here without life preservers on, and there's a little bit of standing up in boats, and perhaps not quite up to today's standards. But one thing is clear from some of these old photos, and that is that the waterfront for a lot of summer youth programs is the centerpiece of activity. So whether it's a natural body of water or a pool, we all love to cool off on a hot summer day. It's also a place where you can learn to swim, where you can sail, where you can paddle, and the more we can create environments where accidents and injuries are minimized, the better. Here's a more modern shot of the waterfront, part of the waterfront at the camp where I grew up. As I said, some of you joining us today or listening to the recording have as the centerpiece of your aquatics program pools. So whatever it is, your body of water or bodies of water, let's take a deep dive into what kind of design in terms of the equipment and the policy is going to minimize accidents and injuries. The first is maybe the most obvious, but also in my travels, the most oft neglected. So I'm a teacher here at Phillips Exeter Academy. That's what's in the background here. My book's my office. It's an independent high school in Seacoast, New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. And during the summer, as I said, I spent nearly 3 decades as the waterfront director. I also traveled to about 20 different camps between the end of May and the beginning of July to provide consultation and staff training. And I always am surprised when access to water is not restricted or it's not clear. So obvious things, you know, if you have a swimming pool, it needs to be fenced in. If you're on a lake or a river, the expectation is not that there be a fence blocking the entire thing, because you might have miles of fencing, but that swimming areas especially are marked. And the point is, you know, yes, a child could scoot under this rope or jump over it or unclip it for that matter, but that the signage is clear. And if you have persons who are part of your summer youth program community, whether they're participants or staff members who have visual impairments, then providing a physical barrier is especially important, so they can feel that, or you might provide an auditory barrier. Here, there's a visual barrier, there's a physical barrier, but very clear, waterfront closed, no lifeguard on duty, and that goes for staff as well as for, you know, for campers. And forgive me if I keep using the word camp. Some of you run Parks and Rec departments. Some of you have other summer youth programs. But when I say camp, I mean all summer youth programs, both day and resident. When I started as waterfront director in 1989 at Camp Belknap, one of the most vexing problems that we had was around accountability. And there were 2 reasons for this. So if you remember, and I can go back a couple of slides and show you our main dock, the access point, and I'll just use a pen here to show you. I think probably pink will show up well. Right over here is the beginning of the dock. It's kind of a modified F. So if you looked at it from the air, it would look like this. And what you're looking at right now is this section here. Well, I shouldn't do blue on blue, but there you go. So the access to shore is actually right here. And to make it less confusing, I'll erase all of my wonderful drawings here. But we were getting kids to come onto the dock for swims and for lessons in buddy pairs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But what was happening is we would sometimes get the odd camper who came down without a buddy, or he was in a buddy pair and his buddy decided he didn't want to swim anymore, so now we have a singleton. And the former practice was to create a triple. So add the singleton camper to the buddy pair, and then when we would do buddy checks, it would sound like something like 12 3T. So we have 12 buddy pairs and 3 triples. And I quickly discovered that triples introduced a lot of error into our buddy counts. And when it comes to counting kids, we want 0 error. So we changed 2 things. We said buddy pairs only, and if you're a singleton, we'll find you a staff member or another camper who will swim with you. And I can tell you, in the 28 years that followed, never a problem. We never had a singleton camper who was waiting for more than a minute before somebody else decided that their buddy was too cold, and then we could match those kids up. So I would implore you to stick with just buddy pairs. But back to access points here, the other problem we were having is that well-intentioned kids would just wander off the dock. And I'm sure all of you have had the experience, and it's quite frightening, of your buddy count, or however you are accounting for kids in the water, not matching what's on the clipboard. So you've got 28 buddy pairs in the water and you've counted them twice, but there's 29 on your clipboard, or on the pegboard, or the buddy board. And it's that's of course a moment when you have to conduct a lost bather drill, and only to discover that this was not, fortunately, 2 kids who had drowned, but a miscount, in the sense that you had a pair of kids who had wandered off the dock. So what we created, in addition to the standard waterfront closed sign, is a swinging gate, cut out of plywood and on saloon hinges. So it swings in both directions with a reminder, please check in. And the person who's keeping track of how many buddy pairs are on the dock is a lifeguard who is sitting in the closer of these 2 seats in this kind of double Adirondack chair, not functioning as a guard looking at buddy pairs in the water. If that were the case, you'd want to be standing or up much higher, but keeping eagle eyes on this gate. The swinging gate functions as a reminder. You also position a guard there who, because he's sitting, is at the level of the campers and also not wandering. So he's oriented in a particular direction, right toward the gate's opening. And on the other side of the gate, it says, did you check out? So after creating this gate, and this is probably the 3rd version we've had, but we really didn't have any problems with miscounts. That's not to say that we didn't sometimes miscount, but we didn't have kids wandering off the dock without checking out. And boy, that's reassuring. As a waterfront director, as a lifeguard, you'll be happy that you're doing fewer unnecessary lost bather drills. Now, your waterfront is going to look different. As I said, maybe you have a pool, maybe you're on a river, but you can design based on this principle of marking when the waterfront is closed very clearly and having no lifeguard on duty signs up, and think about your waterfront and the ways in which you're running into occasional problems with miscounts. And if that's the case, I can guarantee that there's a systems level problem that you can probably fix by re-engineering access to the waterfront. So think about that. The next waterfront safety procedure or design element that I think is really important is that guards be properly prepared. So this is more of a policy thing than an equipment thing, but I often see at different summer programs guards clothed like this one in sweatpants or a sweatshirt, something fairly heavy that would be difficult to swim in. And I think this guard is going to be a lot less effective. Even if it's a chilly, windy day, he's got to have something else on that he can quickly take off. Getting out of this or jumping in with this are both going to represent delays in some kind of a in-water rescue. So if a guard came down like this in boots and a sweatshirt and pants, I would say, Nick, I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for coming down to your lifeguard duty. Listen, I hope you've got a bathing suit on under there because I need you to get ready to get in the water. That's the state I need you in if you're lifeguarding. Lifeguards also function best when they are rested, hydrated, protected from the sun, either with a wide-brimmed hat or sunscreen or both, sunglasses. They can certainly wear a light shirt that they can take off quickly, but sun protection is really important to prevent them from obviously getting sunburned, but also preventing them from getting dehydrated or just really hot and starting to get woozy and not paying attention. So you want your lifeguards, of course, alert, but I find that a lot of summer youth programs don't do much to contribute to lifeguards being in tip-top shape. So it's a wonderful idea to have a cooler of ice water down on the waterfront, especially on the hottest days, to which your lifeguards have access, or maybe you have a drinking fountain that's down there. But keeping everybody hydrated, stocking, could be a Pelican case or something even less weatherproof, but some decent quality sunglasses, which you can get polarized, UV protection for $10, $12. In fact, I don't buy sunglasses that are more expensive than that. I sometimes covet the expensive sunglasses, but with, two boys of my own, and when they were toddlers, taking daddy's sunglasses and pulling them apart like this, I learned very quickly that expensive sunglasses don't last long. So I'm all about the $12 sunglasses, and if you gather a bunch of those and maybe even label them with the camp's name, if somebody comes down without sunglasses, instead of putting them on duty and just coming to terms with the fact that they're going to be relatively ineffective, you can lend them a pair of sunglasses. Same goes for goggles, especially for your guards who wear contact lenses. But the overall message here is to make sure that your guards are really ready to go. That means they've got proper safety equipment, they've got a whistle, and they're dressed, ready to get wet. If there are parts of that aren't happening, again, consider revising the procedure or the policy or the schedule so that there's enough time for, let's say, the staff member who is running a soccer activity up on the field to change and come down to perform lifeguard duty. Make sure that if you have lifeguards on duty for a good chunk of the day, that they get plenty of breaks, not just rotating positions during their duty time, but that they rotate off duty for a period of time so that they can rehydrate, so that they can rest. You'll know if they're not paying attention by the look on their face and whether or not they're scanning. But you can remind them, or if you're watching this and you're the person who supervises the waterfront director, this is a crucial message to get across, that good management means making sure that all of your personnel are in tip-top shape. So once they are in shape and you have restricted access in a way that doesn't cause unnecessary confusion or anxiety, and your guards are in position, you want to make sure that they're scanning properly. Lifeguarding historically is kind of this, sexy camp job where you're going to, put on your sunscreen and get a tan and sort of look good in the sun. But it's quite an active process. It involves a lot of attentional capacity, which is finite for all human beings. So there's a limit to how long you can really focus and concentrate on what's going on in the water. And I'll talk about some ways to make that a bit easier for your lifeguards, but let's just talk about what proper scanning technique is. It's so important because with, safe equipment and guards who are ready to go, if this final piece of proper scanning is not put in place, everything looks good, but the reality is you're not actually having your lifeguards monitor what's going on in the water. And one of the ways that you can, sort of surreptitiously test this is to, in a controlled fashion, have an experienced buddy pair who is checking in for a free swim or general swim or open swim, whatever it is that you call it, submerge themselves, or maybe one member of the buddy pair in a planned way would submerge himself or herself for 20 seconds or 30 seconds and see whether there is a response from any of the guards. As you know, and we'll talk about in a little bit, drowning is a silent process, so your guards are not standing by waiting for someone to call for help. They may be looking for a distressed swimmer and some thrashing around, but it can also be quick and silent and just slipping under the water. If they're not actively scanning, they're not going to see something like that. Even if they are actively scanning, we're talking about a very low probability event, and it's, you know, that makes lifeguarding much more difficult than it would otherwise look. So on this slide, I have drawn, you know, sort of vertical, and there are some complementary horizontal lines that might mimic what, or track that lifeguard's gaze. The point is, if, you know, this is his area, he is responsible for it all, and doing some scanning up and down, doing some scanning back and forth. This is a pool situation, so it's a bit more controlled, which is to say there aren't currents, there aren't tides, the bottom conditions are known, and it looks like it's not terribly deep, maybe 4 or 5 feet deep. So this is a little bit less complicated than, say, a natural body of water with you know, unknown bottom conditions and a sloping bottom down from, you know, the beach to 14, 15, 16 feet, and limited visibility. But obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you've got to adjust to that as well. So back to scanning. So you've done some vertical scanning, some horizontal scanning, or you know, scanning your area. I don't object to this lifeguard being up in his lifeguard chair. It's a good vantage point. However, lifeguards should periodically get off their lifeguard chairs and walk around just to keep the blood flowing. And they should also be aware that if they're in a lifeguard chair, that is probably creating some blind spots, or if not blind spots, it's creating some potentially neglected spots. So I have a slide here that just shows in a yellow area, kind of highlighted, it will require intentional action from this lifeguard to, you know, put his head down and sort of look right under his feet, which if he does, he'll spot this swimmer over here in the corner. I've drawn a little purple sun around this swimmer who, if you didn't see before, has been there all the time, but for you as a viewer, just like for the lifeguard up in the chair, may not have been something you saw right away. So being able to scan your area, and especially the area right underneath you, is super important. And if any of your guards are sitting, as I said earlier, that needs to be an elevated seat, really not appropriate for them to be slouching in a lawn chair or an Adirondack chair. This guard is stationed on a dock where there's some equipment. This happens to be a water polo net, basketball net combination. And one of the things this guard is doing well is not just scanning out in front of himself and sort of up and around like this, but actually getting down and looking to see how things are right under his nose. It is, as I said, an oft neglected area. Another thing that often happens, whatever, you know, pool, lake, river, ocean, is that campers want to interact with the staff, which is wonderful. And what you need to train your lifeguards to do is to respond to, you know, questions about what's for lunch and what time is it and can you get me another water polo ball, by not taking your eyes off the water. So this is a good example in this picture of a lifeguard, you know, in terms of a safety policy design procedure, doing a really good job keeping his eyes on the water. He can tell the camper what time it is, or he can, you know, guess at what's for lunch, or whatever the question is, and keep his eyes on the water. And that way he's still doing his job. But it does happen often that lifeguards get distracted, and being distracted even just for half a minute, I think, you know, can be potentially, as you all know, quite risky, quite dangerous. So to the extent possible, making this part of the guarding culture at your camp, really important. It's a little bit of a joke, but not really. So there's obviously a slide of the sky, and it says, "No one drowns up here." But I can't tell you the number of times when I've had to ask guards to keep their eyes on the water because they're, "Oh, isn't that an amazing flock of geese flying by? That's almost a perfect V formation." Or, do you think that's a Cessna 140, or does that look more like a 160? Or, and does it look like it might rain? Obviously, guards need to pay attention to the weather, but staring up at the sky, watching birds, watching airplanes, whatever it might be, that doesn't necessarily have to be up in the sky. There can be a lot going on a waterfront, and my point here is that it's easy to become distracted, and it does take a lot of focus and attention and concentration to be able to lifeguard, which is why sleep is important, and hydration is important, and protection from the sun is important. So, the proper care and feeding of your lifeguards, as well as creating an atmosphere on your waterfront or pool where you'll give appropriate reminders and do some periodic spot testing of people's attentional capacity. It really helps keep the lifeguards on their toes. There is often, for day camps and for overnight camps, trip day, or there are trips to the beach. So here's a group of staff who took some kids to the beach, and this is wonderful. These are all certified guards, and I asked a question, how awesome is this pic? When I take a look at this, I think it's funny. It's a great picture. For the kids dug holes and the guards buried themselves in the sand. And I asked one of the guards, so yeah, this is really cool. Who took the picture, and where were the other kids? Well, they were swimming, but don't worry, they had buddies. Okay, that's good. And do you feel like you were ready if any of them was in distress? And then it sort of clicked, like, yeah, I guess even if we are looking in the direction of the water, we're not really in a position to provide a rescue. And this may be a bit of a dramatic example, but one of the things that you can do this season is ask the guards to ask themselves, ask the waterfront director to pay attention. In the way that you run your program, are there ever times when guards are asked to do things or choose to do things themselves that inadvertently take them out of commission, like these guards? Could they get out of their sand pits and run down to the shoreline if a camper were having trouble? Yes. But does it take some extra time? Yes, it does. So, we always want to have fun at camp, but separating some of the games and kind of fooling around from the on-duty time is important. So a picture like this would be great if it were taken at the end of the day or the beginning of the day before or after campers were in the water. So just not confounding some of the playful things that we want our staff to do with some of the more serious things like being a lifeguard. I said earlier how important buddies are and the objection that I have to triples. It has been an excellent system of accountability. It something I really endorse because it also allows each camper to be a lookout for another camper. It's another set of eyes on each kid in addition to the eyes of the lifeguard. As you know, most of the time someone is distressed, they're not calling for help. Certainly if they're drowning, they're not calling for help. So we really have to go more by visual than auditory cues, except if your buddy is fine, your buddy can call out. And this has happened a number of times at the Belknap waterfront, and it's evidence of the system working quite well, that not only does a buddy pair, and again, we don't allow singletons, we don't allow triples, we just always swim in pairs, staff included. it gives lifeguards a visual target. You're always looking for pairs of kids, and if you see a kid swimming alone, that could be a problem. It might just be that their buddy dove down to, pick a stone off the lake bottom or something like that. But it could be that they've lost track of where their buddy is. So it's a visual target. It's a bit of redundancy, and gives kids, an important responsibility. They, of course, are not their buddy's lifeguard. That's a job for somebody who's certified, who's got some experience, who's out of the water, but they certainly can function as a lookout. And I think it's a wonderful habit to instill, is that you get used to never swimming alone. Here's that same waterfront. This is Lake Winnipesaukee in central New Hampshire. And again, your waterfront may be different. You can certainly imagine, what do you do in a pool setting, or what do you do on your river or your ocean front? But what you see here is we're doing a buddy check. So you can see that the lifeguards have safety equipment. They're carrying either they've got a rescue tube or they've got a reach pole. And when we blow the whistle for a buddy check, everybody holds their buddy's hand up in the air. And if they're in a place where they can't stand, they tread water. But they hold still, and we count the number of buddy pairs. It's a very quick system of accountability. It's one that is very much part of the culture. That is to say, people swimming in pairs and not alone, and also swimming within 10 feet of your buddy. So not straying far from your swimming companion. Again, whether it's a staff member down for a swim, whether it's a camper. I'm not going to talk a lot in this webinar about the different swim levels and the areas where kids are allowed to swim, but that, of course, is that's a safety procedure as well. If someone is a beginner swimmer, you're going to keep them in an area where they can stand. If someone's intermediate, they can venture out a little further. If someone is in a more advanced group, maybe they can swim in the deep end. Why? Well, in part because there are more challenges in deeper water, and during a buddy check like this, which might take 20 seconds, 30 seconds. If we have to recount, it could take up to a minute. And in that case, it's really important that you be able to tread water with one hand up for at least a minute. So, that's something that's really important to, to consider. I'm going to address a question from Skip Garini, who asks, we often have an all-swim event in our pool. We can have up to 30 plus kids in the pool with counselors. Guards are present, but a buddy system would be virtually impossible. What do you recommend for this type of event? Thank you, Skip, for your question. It goes well with this slide. And what I would say is I disagree with the premise of your question. So respectfully, you absolutely can have every kid swimming with a buddy. In the, the slide that you're looking at here, we've had up to 70 or 75 buddy pairs. So, that's 140, 150 kids. It is essential. And you can have a counselor and a camper be a buddy pair. You can have two campers. You can have two counselors. But I would argue quite strongly that every program needs a system of accountability that allows you to say, okay, we are starting this really fun all-swim event, and the initial count, having everybody lined up before they get in the water, is 15 buddy pairs. Or let's make it more. Let's make it, 20 buddy pairs. That would be 40 kids and counselors, total. We've got these 20 buddy pairs. People can now go ahead and swim. You swim with your buddy. It's a lot of fun. You do all the, it doesn't restrict activities in any way. And when the lifeguard, and you should do this every sort of 5 to 7 minutes, blows a buddy check, you hold your buddy's hand up in the air. The lifeguards count the number of buddy pairs. They kind of verify, did you get what I got? Yes, I did. Check with the person who's at the gate. You got 40, or you got 20 buddy pairs, 40 kids, 20 buddy pairs. Yep, good. Okay, swim. The whole thing takes maybe 20 or 30 seconds, as I said, unless you have to recount. But lacking that system, And if you're not able to check every 5 to 7 minutes exactly how many people you have in the water, then I think you're introducing a kind of liability that you don't want. And having a system of accountability might seem a tiny bit cumbersome at first for a really festive and crowded activity like this. But trust me that it's going to put your guards at ease. And if you have, a pair of kids that needs to leave to go to the bathroom, they check out with the person at the gate, and you go down from 20 buddy pairs to 19 buddy pairs. You blow buddy check, 19, fabulous. You won't worry. I think without a system of accountability and the redundancy of buddy pairs, I would be concerned that it's much more difficult to account for the number of campers. I've been at camps where instead of buddy pairs, they use a buddy board, sort of a tag board, so they don't insist that kids swim in pairs or play in the water in pairs, but they can just go individually. And when a buddy check is blown, or when a check is blown, and you count the number of campers in the water and you look at who's moved their tag over on the buddy board, every time I've seen that not match at a camp, the response has been the same, which is, oh, well, I think I saw that kid go up to the bathroom, or, yeah, I think, was that Brendan? Yeah, he said he needed to go get his towel. And, there you're in the really awkward position of weighing, possible drowning versus, kid not being conscientious about moving his tag, or, tags that are easily blown away by the wind. So I'm not a big fan of buddy boards. If you do use them, I would say get some metal washers and paint them with excellent, like Rust-Oleum or some kind of enamel spray paint, so that they're heavy and they don't blow away, and each one has a kid's name on it. And you still need a guard there at the buddy board to make sure that the tag is being moved. It's just not something that the kids take seriously enough to do reliably on their own. Here is a guard. You can see this is not during a buddy check, but our guards are used to looking for kids in pairs, and again, making a visual target something really to look for, not just there's a single kid, is he okay, but I see a pair of kids, and if there's a singleton, I need to look more closely. That's really, really important. So buddy pair gives you, whether it's during a buddy check like in this photo, or they're just swimming, it gives guards a high frequency target. This is an expression I learned from my friend Howard Longino, who trains a lot of lifeguards, and it really reminded me, if all that lifeguards have to look for is the once in a million kid who is having some distress in the water, at some level you may just give up scanning, because this thing that you're scanning for is so very rare. It would be like sending you into the woods and saying, I want you to look for an Arctic fox. The chances that one would go by, extraordinarily low. But if I said, look for anything that moves, whether it's a squirrel or a chipmunk, or okay, now you're going to be actively engaged. Well, when I tell my guards, when you're scanning, up, down, side to side, I want you to be looking for buddy pairs. It's a very high frequency target. And if you see a singleton, or obviously if you see a kid in distress, now you've got something to look for. Speaking of things to look for, like most webinar platforms, it's difficult to play video because people have different speeds of receiving the information. So I don't have any video to show you, but I would let you know that if you go to YouTube and type in drowning as a keyword, there are videos that circulate once in a while that I think are morbid but instructive, and you can see what it looks like for someone to drown or nearly drown. In this one, a person had set up their camera on a tripod to record themselves in a quarry looking for gold nuggets, actually. So this was a place where people had panned a lot for gold, and where this gentleman had found a gold nugget before, and he was really excited to sort of capture this on camera. And it's not clear what happened. He may have taken so many deep breaths that he had some shallow water blackout, or something else occurred. But you watch this video, which he narrates and talks about finding gold in this quarry, and he doesn't come up for a breath at one point, and is just floating there, and tragically has drowned. And one of the things that is disturbing and stunning about a video like that is how quickly and how quietly a drowning can happen. So at the risk of sensationalizing an event like that, or exploiting someone who has tragically died, showing some of these to your lifeguards as part of the training can be very instructive. The reason that this had been left up on YouTube by the relatives of this gentleman was to provide instruction on the importance of having a buddy be with you when you go into the water. Swimming alone is usually fine, but if something did happen, if you're by yourself and you have some trouble, it could potentially be lethal. So that's why I say life is better with a lifeguard. And there's my younger son when he was probably 6, 7, doing a flip off the diving board. He did land on his feet. That's good. As I've described, I've spent a lot of time on the waterfront, and at our lakeside, we have about 2,000 feet of shorefront. There's plenty of lost and found. Most of it is on the shore, plenty of towels and socks and other things, and the occasional single shoe, which leads you to wonder, how is it that a child can return to his or her cabin with one shoe and not notice that they may have left something behind? But you've all worked with young people for long enough to know that anything is possible. So I have no explanation for that, but there's also a good amount of lost and found that end up in the water. And I have this slide up to remind me that it is crucially important to always have a buddy, to never swim alone, to always have a lifeguard on duty when people are in the water. And here's my anecdote. Camper came up to me during dinner and said, Chris, I think I lost my watch in the deep end. And I said, do you know kind of where you were? And he said, yeah, I was over by the diving board that's closest to the flagpole. And good news, it's a white digital watch, but I can't dive all the way down to the bottom, about 11 or 12 feet. Would you help me? So I said, after dinner, I don't mind taking a look. So, why don't you meet me at main dock, and I'll find another leader who can, be my buddy, and I'll take a look, which I did. So I brought another leader with me. I said, would you sit here on the edge? I'm going to be 2 feet in front of you. I'm going to dive down. I'm going to look for this watch. Camper was there. And I dove, and I dove again, couldn't see anything on the bottom. Took a final dive to scan the area that was just underneath the dock. Didn't see anything. Did a couple of back sculls to make sure that I was out from underneath the dock. I could see the change in the daylight, but being 10 or 11 feet under, pushed off the bottom with great force so that I could rocket up to the surface, and banged my head on the bottom rung of this metal ladder, which really stunned me. I thought that maybe, didn't know what had happened actually, that someone had thrown something into the water. My goggles filled with water, so I also couldn't see very well, but dinged myself up pretty good here. Lucky loser or both, and obviously there I am. Ended up having 32 stitches, fortunately by an accomplished surgeon. So as you can see, not too bad of a scar there. But I shared this story with uh, all of the staff annually to illustrate a couple of things. First of all, it doesn't matter how good a swimmer you are or how much experience you have on a waterfront, accidents can still happen. Second, it is essential that you've got a buddy, somebody there that you never swim alone. I was able to make it up that ladder by myself, but started to get pretty lightheaded. Think I'd rung my bell pretty well when I, was a couple steps up the ladder. So I was glad that there was somebody else there. Naturally, I was glad that there was another staff member there who could get the nurse and a first aid kit, and that was okay. But if I'd knocked myself out on that bottom rung, I would have died because I was underwater. And fortunately, I had somebody right there sitting on the edge, watching me in the water do these dives, lifeguarding me, serving as my buddy and my lifeguard simultaneously. And, obviously I lived. But the point is, experience helps, but there's no substitute for, a partner who's going to keep an eye on you. And never found the watch, by the way. So that story only has a happy ending, sort of cosmetically, but not chronographically. There you go. When you are instructing, and you see here, there's an instructor there in a blue shirt. He is taking attendance for the intermediate swim class that he's about to teach. Instructors are at the same time functioning as lifeguards. So a couple things need to happen. You need to make sure that in instructional periods, you're not exceeding the ratios that you allow at your facility, which may vary from, camp to camp based on kids' abilities and based on the number of lifeguards that you have. But the reason I put this slide up is because the in-water rescues that we've had at Belknap have primarily been during lessons. And that shouldn't come as a surprise because it's during lessons that kids are pushing the limits of their ability. It's during lessons that kids are putting forth a lot of effort. So they're trying new skills. They may be in deeper water for the first time, and they're getting tired. So that's a recipe for, potentially becoming a distressed swimmer. So I work really hard with my instructors to emphasize to them, you need to buddy kids up in the lesson, and you need to make sure that you are counting the number of buddy pairs and ensuring that you've got the same number of kids throughout the entire lesson. And, when we have something like, I have to go to the bathroom, usually that's a good time to get all the kids out of the water and take a break and do some dry land instruction and, send a few kids to the bathroom if that's what needs to happen. But we want to put policies in place that make it as easy as possible for instructors to function as lifeguards. And then, of course, on top of the instructors who are functioning as lifeguards, you've also got a waterfront director or acting waterfront director who's keeping an eye on everything and who's not instructing, because you want somebody who's got oversight the entire operation when lessons are happening. As you can see, kids get very exuberant. These kids are super excited. Wonderful that there's so much enthusiasm. Also be sure that in a moment like this, one camper is not still in the water, or one camper hasn't started to wander off the dock. The previous slide shows a very well-contained, calm class on a calm day. This is getting a little rowdy, which again is fine as long as the staff members here, there's one in sunglasses on the right there, there's a junior leader who's in the middle of the crowd. The point is systems of accountability only work as well as the accounters, so make sure that they're vigilant. As I said, during lessons, kids are pushing the limits of their abilities, and when they're doing that, you want to make sure that it's being done in a way that is as safe as possible. So we sometimes let our very beginner swimmers, you see my boys here when they were about 3 and 5 or 2 and 4, another boy here jumping off the diving board. Normally, we're not letting kids go in the deep end unless they've passed a certain level of swimming and they're in a more sort of advanced intermediate or advanced swim group. But it's a lot of fun to jump off the diving boards and a really cool way to celebrate the end of a lesson or begin a lesson for that matter. And so what I'm illustrating here is, these campers have on type 3 PFDs so that they can enjoy jumping off the tower or the diving board as part of some healthy risk taking. But because I know that their swimming level is very beginner, they're going to wear a life jacket. And I think, I've seen that done extremely well at camps where, regardless of your swimming level, camps, for example, like my friends at Camp Laney who are in Mentone, Alabama, they're on a river. The little river has a little current. And when you're swimming in the river, and they have awesome, slide and rope swings, but everybody's wearing a life jacket, regardless of swimming level. It's just an added level of protection, doesn't impede anybody's fun, and so consider having those type 3, quite comfortable vest type PFDs. I've talked importantly about systems of accountability. Think about ways that you can improve your system, whatever that is, and if the system occasionally breaks down, you can do kind of a self-audit. Where were the snags last season? Where did we have miscounts? Or when did that seem to occur? Or when did the guards say they felt overwhelmed? Did it have to do with the number of kids in the water? Did it have to do with the system itself, clipboard, notebook, buddy board? Or did it have to do, like it did for me at Belknap when I started as Waterfront director, that we were allowing triples and that was just a headache? Or we were we had no reminder gate that kids had to walk through, so that it was just kind of, once we opened the waterfront, the traffic flow was not well controlled. And where I see this breaking down a lot, when a camp or Parks and Rec department or other summer youth program has like super solid things in place and beautiful signage and, adhering to a buddy system, when they take an off-site trip, somehow the systems start to break down. And I myself am guilty of, not following my own rules once in a while. It seems to be that when we're immersed in, particular area, it all makes sense. And then somehow we go off-site, trip to the beach, or, trip to the municipal pool. And it's like, wait, we let our systems fall apart. So we know that not all guarding situations are ideal either. I mean, this stock photo shows this lifeguard in an elevated chair. She's got her equipment. I don't know where her whistle is, but it's not always that sort of neat and clean. And sometimes there's wind and waves, and it can look pretty different. Another time I see systems break down, AC accreditation standard is that everyone wear a life jacket when they're in a watercraft, but I don't see boat drivers wear them a lot. And you should, not only because it sets a great example for the kids, but if you get knocked unconscious, and I'm not talking about an uncontrolled jibe in a sailboat, but, slip in the 25 horsepower launch that my friend Tom is pictured in here, and bang your head or whatever, or you have to turn the motor off when you're out in the bay and perform a rescue because, kids are having trouble, kids caught under a sail that has, sort of flopped on top of them when they're, 420 capsized or something. Point is, you can't anticipate all these scenarios, and I think it's hypocritical for us to ask kids to put on life jackets whenever they're in boats, but then we don't. We are not immune to accidents. So you can see how thrilled Tom is to be wearing a life jacket, but I love him too much for, to let him go out on that boat without one. And I, as you can see here, in this kayak, trying to, from a very young age, instill in my children the importance of wearing a life jacket. We were probably in 4 inches of water in this photo, but they just know to wear life jackets, and all of your campers and staff should as well. This life jacket should be properly fitting. So another area where I see well-intentioned, well-trained waterfront staff dropping the ball letting kids go out in life jackets that, if they were now in the water, would be up above their shoulders and maybe over their ears and head, in which case it is not going to be helpful. If this is a non-swimmer, this bulky Type 1 vest is not going to prevent him from drowning. His head is going to be underwater. So, here's the rhetorical question: how good are rules you don't follow? There was a camp that passed along this photo to me and said, how awesome is this picture? It's a wonderful photo. It's a crazy, cool flip off of a cliff into what happens to be 4 feet of water. So in my book, whether you're landing head first or feet first, that's too shallow. And it may make for a great posting on Instagram or other social media, but I shudder when I see a photo like that, because I know that especially if this teenager doesn't enter the water feet first, we had a pretty serious head injury here. So, unhealthy risk-taking tends to abound at off-site trips, and would urge people to, be talking with their staff about how policies are implemented consistently, whether you're on-site or off-site. Let's see. Another question: our camp also has a large lakefront area. Swimming is not permitted in the lake, but boating is quite popular. Many of our boats are single-seat kayaks. Cool. Life jackets are mandatory. Awesome. Counselors are always vigilant and guards are on duty. Do you recommend the buddy system for this scenario? And I would say no, because it's not swimming, and therefore, less likely the kids are in the water. But obviously, one-person kayaks, there's going to be a lot of flipping. But I'm going to say I don't think that buddies are mandatory in that situation. But what is mandatory is that the number of kids and the number of boats that are out there. And ideally, these boats are numbered so that you have, it says Beth Judson is in kayak 4 and Chris Thurber is in kayak 5. And that way, if you see kayak 5 sort of floating by in the wind, you can look on your clipboard and say, well, it should be Chris Thurber there. Who's the, oh, well, we got 2 kids. Look, he's climbing onto that other kid's boat. So again, accountability, I think, is really important. Question from Jennifer Benton: how do you feel about music at a pool party? Jennifer, it really depends. If it's really good 80s music, then I approve. If it's kind of, indie 90s, no, I'm just kidding. Look, I think that if you have a really good system of accountability, which I've described, ideally a, buddy system that's not dependent on a buddy board, then having some music can add to, really festive atmosphere. But it's it's definitely impossible to say it's this way or it's that way, because I would want to ask your guards, are you all comfortable with some music in the background, or is it distracting? I'm not concerned about the music for noise covering somebody calling for help in a pool situation. I mean, in a lake situation, I don't think you can have music because it's just too big an area. And something about music blaring at a natural body of water is a little bit off for me as an aesthetic. But at a pool party where there's some music and it's not so loud that the guards can't do their job, that is to say, if they blow their whistle, the kids can hear it. If they need to talk to a kid, the kids can hear them. So I would experiment with the volume. I would experiment with the placement of the speakers, and I would get feedback from your guards. I don't think it's a deal breaker, but sort of have to be done judiciously. Che is asking, and this is great because here we are at the Q&A section, so keep the questions coming. We just have a couple minutes left. What's your view of guards carrying rescue equipment like a rescue tube rather than a life jacket? We found it more effective for in-water rescues. Oh, well, look, if Che, or maybe you're pronounced Shay, but this is a wonderful question. So we're talking about the guards here, carrying rescue equipment rather than a life jacket. If you're talking about guards in boats, I would say you need a rescue tube in the boat in case you need to rescue someone who's out in another boat. You always want a rescue tube with any kind of in-water rescue. Hands down, that's your best friend. And if you're in a boat, regardless of your age, you need to be wearing a life jacket. So, for example, when we do deep water backboardings, the only scenario in which you would have a deep water backboarding is either in the deep end of your swimming area or out, if you have a natural body of water like a lake, out water skiing or tubing or something like that. Deep water backboarding is notoriously difficult because you need to tread water at the same time. But if the guard is wearing a life jacket, and at our waterfront, the deep end guards can quickly put a life jacket on because we have them hanging underneath the tower so that a deep water backboarding is done quickly and competently. If, your question is either or, I would actually say both. I don't think that you want a lifeguard ever in a situation where he or she doesn't have a rescue tube. However, the rescue tube is missing or broken or malfunctions, that guard needs to be able to do his or her job, and you can do that better while wearing a life jacket, then by all means, put it on. So boats always, if you're in a boat, you have a life jacket. If you're guarding, you always have a rescue tube, and rescue tube plus life jacket, especially in a deep water situation, awesome. Do you have any recommendations for a first-time lifeguard at a summer camp? Yes, I do. You need to be familiar with the operations of that facility and some of the quirks of whether it's human-made or natural body of water, what some of the idiosyncrasies of that are. So every body of water and every summer youth program has differences, and you got to familiarize yourself with those. And then, and I think I have a slide of this, you've really got to go through there I am, see, not wearing a life jacket, not obeying my own rules. Obviously, keeping your rescue equipment ready to go and in good shape is important. What I was going to say next is related to David's question, and that is practice. Practice in the particular area where you'll be lifeguarding. So in your lifeguard course, you will have learned these signs of drowning, but what does it actually look like in the particular, in this case, natural body of water, where you are. There's my shout out for Frank Pia, who's a real innovator in this area. I want to show you this slide of the guards doing a lost bather drill. So this is something that we practice at least weekly, but a new guard at a place, you definitely want to make sure that you're fully trained in the lost bather drill or emergency rescue plan, underwater search and rescue. Obviously, there are very different bottom conditions. You want to make sure that you've got practice doing the things that you learned in your lifeguarding course, but now in this new setting. You can get practice both on site. You can also get some practice online. My friend Evan and I have created a library of 140 video training modules. Half dozen or so cover lifeguarding. So you can check out the website expertonlinetraining.com. A few more questions here as we wrap up the webinar. I was wondering your take on the use of fanny packs per lifeguard containing contents for immediate care compared to bringing campers to a station medic kit for proper care. Eladio, that's a really good question. Last year I recertified my lifeguarding for the umpteenth time, and I guess I appreciated having that fanny pack. I would warn you that if you are lifeguarding in the UK, do not call it a fanny pack. It's a bum pack, and I'll let you discover why you might not want to call it a fanny pack. But I liked having the the breathing mask and a pair of gloves and a few other things like right there. And I just know that in a lot of waterfront situations, it hasn't been a distressed or drowning swimmer. It's been a bleeding injury. Somebody stubs their toe or something. I'm glad that I have gloves right there, rather than running to go get them or walking quickly to go get them, or taking a kid who's dripping blood all over the place. Not a serious injury, but they're leaving a little trail behind them. I sort of like having that equipment nearby. Does it need to be on every single guard? I don't know. It needs to be within easy reach. You can put some of those essentials in a weatherproof box, just like a Tupperware box, in some strategic places around your pool or natural waterfront. And then everyone doesn't need to have a fanny pack, but they also don't need to transport a camper that they need to, apply well-aimed direct pressure to. So I hope that answers your question. And then last one for today, I was wondering your take. Oh no, that was a repeat. Second fanny pack question. All right, well, we've just gone a few minutes over, but I'm very glad that everybody stayed. I'll turn things back over to Beth before I say I'm super grateful that you all could join us. I'm sure that there are more questions out there. You've got the sort of thank you slide here at the end. Contact information for me is really easy. The easiest thing to do is just write to Beth, write to Markel for the handout that I have that accompanies this webinar, for my contact information. If you want to check out some of those videos, it's expertonlinetraining.com. You can check that out. And if you've forgotten all of this, your insurance company, reach out to them. Who is the guy that did the waterfront thing, and can I get some more materials? But super grateful that you've joined us. If you have suggestions for future webinars, Ian's the point person there. You can see his email, igarner@markel.com. And obviously, campinsurance.com is the page on the Markel website that has lots more educational information. So that's it from Exeter, New Hampshire. I'm Dr. Chris Thurber, thanking you for your participation and hoping that everybody has an awesome weekend. Thank you.